Welcome to the Wyoming Military Department Suicide Prevention Symposium, September 10th, 2020. We are broadcasting live at the Luke Reiner Auditorium here at the Cheyenne, Wyoming Joint Force. This broadcast, please don't hesitate to contact us live on via Facebook comments, or you're welcome to email us your questions at the Wyoming ARNG Suicide Prevention at gmail.com. I am Kimberly Dreyer, the Wyoming Army Suicide Prevention Coordinator, and I will be your host for today's event. If at any time you are having any suicidal struggles, please don't hesitate to call us on the number below the screen. And now, without further ado, Chaplain Chris Lehman from the 153rd Air National Guard. Chaplain. Sir?
Good morning. I invite you to join me in a word of prayer if you wish. Gracious Father, we thank you for this day and for the opportunity to raise awareness and combat a devastatingly serious issue in society, and specifically among those who serve or who have served this great country. Help all of us connect with those hurting. Protect them in dire times, even from their own hand, and do more than provide resources. Lord, help us all be people that are willing to meet our brothers and sisters in arms right where they are on the path of healing. God, we thank you for the thousands who have reached out for help, survived, and thrived in their military career. Spend us, Lord. Make those divine appointments for us, for those suffering in silence. Father, we thank you for the helpers who have put this symposium together and for their expectant hearts for the fullest of effectiveness. Empower the speakers today. We are grateful for their courage to share painful and difficult stories with the aim of helping others. For those we have lost, we ask for continued comfort for their friends and for their families. Father God, protect us. Fill us with truth, be with us, bless our time together. We ask this in the name above all names. Amen.
Members of the Wyoming Military Department serve as a sword and shield for our state and our nation. Now more than ever, it is time to acknowledge your strengths, your accomplishments, and your bravery in staying resilient and ready when we need you the most. September is National Suicide Prevention Month. Members of the Wyoming Military Department serve as a sword and shield for our state and our nation. Now more than ever, it is time to acknowledge your strengths, your accomplishments, and your bravery in staying resilient and ready when we need you the most. September is National Suicide Prevention Month. However, recognizing the signs and risk factors of suicide is a year-round. If you think a fellow soldier, airman, or coworker might be struggling, ask how they are doing. Care for them by listening to what they have to say. Finally, if needed, escort them to someone who can help. Seeking help is a sign of strength. This year's Suicide Prevention Month slogan, Connect to Protect, highlights the important role that connections to family, friends, the community, and resources can play in preventing suicide as important partners and allies in our suicide prevention. Every suicide is a tragic loss to our nation and to those impacted. In some cases, we may never know why the service member or veteran took their life. Suicide is the culmination of a complex set of factors. Have the courage to reach out for help when it's needed. You can call the Wyoming Military Department Suicide Prevention Hotline at 307-369-3011 or the National Suicide Prevention Hotline at 1-800-273-8255. You are not alone, and people want to hear from you and help. The men and women of the Wyoming Military Department are our strength. Without strength, our sword will break and our shield will buckle. Together, we will work to ensure that will not happen. Promoting individual readiness, healthy behavior, and making our units and our organization a connected community is an all-hands effort. We have help and resources available to each of you. You don't have to experience this alone. Suicide is not an option. Remember, there is help, there is hope, and you are not alone.
Is that better?
All right, you can go. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Timothy Shepard, Executive Director of the Wyoming, The Wire Soldier's Story.
Thank you, Kimberly. Good morning, everyone. I am Tim Shepard, and I'm presently the Executive Director for the Wyoming Veterans Commission. Prior to that, I served in the United States Army and Army National Guard for 40 years. It was a great career, loved it, but in 2011, I was in a what I'll describe as a pretty horrific bicycle accident. And just to give you some context, I broke 7 ribs, 4 of them in half, basically punched a hole in my side, tore my diaphragm, and collapsed my left lung and broke my back in 2 places. So it was definitely significant, and I will tell you, it damn near killed me. Fortunately, it didn't kill me, and I'm here today. But I think that the experience was really, I say that damn near killed me, but I'll say it twice, because the accident itself almost did, but then the recovery ended up being even harder than the accident. And because of the extent of my injuries, I was placed on just massive doses of painkillers and ibuprofen. And the result of the ibuprofen, the massive doses that I had of that, I now have stage 3 kidney disease, which isn't great, but I work hard to maintain my physical conditioning, and it really helps. So the other part, though, was the painkillers and the opioids. At one point, I was on fentanyl patches along with a dose of naproxen once every 4 hours, and spaced in between that another opiate every 2 hours I was taking some form of opiate in addition to the fentanyl patch. Well, after about a year of that, different doses, different times, it really got to me mentally, and it was a downward spiral that really went pretty fast. And so at one point, what I found was I became an insomniac, and that led to a lot of problems for me, because I lost what I'll call my toughness, and I became very vulnerable. And eventually I got to the point where I really felt hopeless, and I felt like I was living in a pit, and that pit kept getting deeper and darker. And the one thing that I held on to was hope, and that somewhere, somehow, I was going to get through that. That was the good side. The bad side was, there is a way out of this. It's not a good one, but there is a way. And that way, it's hard to even say, it was suicide. And it became a matter of how much could I take? How much of the mental stress, the mental strain, and then just the physical pain. I mean, physically it was overwhelming. And a lot of that came from the insomnia, but a lot of it also just came from It was like having the flu every day, all day. So that's the bad part. I will tell you, it got so bad that at one point I voluntarily went to the inpatient unit at the hospital. I think that's where I started to turn. Could somebody hand me my water? I'm really having a hard time. Anyway, that's where I think it started to turn. And there's a gentleman here today. Thank you very much. There's a Tom who I met in group therapy. And I'll say that what he talked about resonated with me and gave me, I'll call it a rope, and helped me start getting out of that pit. The thing that was really important to me was medication. So obviously the opiates were a medication that wasn't helping me, but CRMC East and a lot of intensive therapy, I did find myself getting stronger and able to start to climb out of that pit. I did want to, there are some words that really resonated with me on what it was like to be in that pit, and I wanted to share them with you so I didn't forget them. I wrote them. One thing that was so hard was the loneliness. I really did feel like I was all alone, and I have a lot of great family and great friends, but what I found was that I pushed them away. And even I have 7 kids, and of those 7 kids, for some reason, I really felt it with one of my daughters, and it was incredibly hard because I wanted to reach out to her, but for some reason I felt I couldn't, and so I didn't, and I felt like there was a wall between us. So it was very lonely. And then again, the pit was very dark. The sleeplessness was incredible. And another one that I think was directly related to the opiates was anxiety. Just this constant presence of something really bad's going to happen, and not being able to get away from it. And really, I knew it at the time. It was me. I was afraid of me and what I might do. So the anxiety was very, very hard. I talked about how painful it was, both mentally and physically. And even to stand here today, and I know I shouldn't be, but it's really embarrassing, because I felt so weak, and just what we believe as a society and as a people and in the military culture, this was really contrary to my fellow soldiers, that I would get myself, and I felt like I got myself into this predicament. It was very unique, I thought, that I felt like I was a snowflake, that sometimes things would resonate with me, other times they wouldn't, and so it was very unique. Again, I felt weak. I really felt the stigma of what this was like, and the last one that I still fear this, and that's that pit, because it was so dark, it was so lonely. it was terrifying in there. And again, what I was most afraid of was myself. Okay, so that's enough about that. So what brings me out? I think most importantly was a lot of therapy, a lot of counseling, medication, family, faith. The most important thing, though, was that thing called hope, and that I never lost it completely. I got to points where I would say, I'm pretty close to hopeless here. But then through a therapy or whatever, I would come out of it a little bit. The other thing I wanted to talk about was that this really became a life-changing event, and for the therapy to work, I had to go through a lot of things that happened in my life, not just the accident. Because a lot of other things were coming up, and it was like, well, how do you get past this, and how do you get past that? And it was through some really, really gifted clinicians helping me, and me then helping myself. Mindfulness was a big part of it. I used a lot of techniques that were given to me through therapy of mindfulness and recognizing. One of the main things I had to recognize was those triggers that could potentially put me back in the pit, and that I didn't allow that to happen. That I would stop myself and say, okay, right now all you're going to do is think about walking into the building and what it's like to walk into the building, and just stay focused on the moment. And that really helped me. I can tell you that today I don't feel like I would fall in the pit. Today I feel like I'm much stronger, and I have the tools that help me. And again, a big part of that is friends and family, and I really count on them. But I also count on my psychiatrist. I count on my therapist, who I see now every 2 weeks, and it's very healing for me to continue to do that. I actually do what's called EMDR with my therapist, and that's been life-changing for me. So that's really what I have, Kimberly, unless there are questions for me or other comments.
Thank you very much. We appreciate your service, sir. Thank you.
Oh yeah, you're
Thank
welcome.
you.
right, we got no mics, so forward, back.
And now, Mr. Thomas D. Kirk, Capital Counseling, Cheyenne, Wyoming. Sir.
Thank you very much. I want to start by saying thank you for allowing me to come today and be a part of this process. And thank you all that are participating and watching and being involved here live for your service. It's greatly appreciated. I come from a military family, and so it means a ton for me to be involved with these kinds of things, and I appreciate being asked, given the opportunity to do this. I'd kind of like to probably start out and tell you just a tad bit about myself. I've been a practice in therapy and psychology and forensic psychology and stuff for an extended period of time, probably 35 years. I worked out of the emergency room here locally in town for 25 years and did all the psych emergencies. And fortunately, unfortunately, I've been exposed to a multitude of kind of, sad and conflicting kinds of situations, and way too many people that I've assessed in my career that have been suicidal and helpless, hopeless kinds of dynamics. Actually, out of the emergency room, unfortunately, I've seen a lot, probably 10,000, I guesstimated the other day, attempts, which is, a kind of disturbing number for just one individual to have that much exposure over that period of time. And it's kind of a sad deal. I still deal with things at a pretty consistent level in my private practice. I also do evaluations at the jail, and I still work at the hospital as well. And so, but that being said, some of the dynamics of that, and I wanted to share a little bit today of being able to involve some of the situations and maybe some of the helpful components in terms of conflict resolution. And I wanted to kind of break it up in terms of some of the aspects and some of the defining features involved with the mental health component of that, and kind of what mental health means, as opposed to, maybe the generic kind of component of it. Conflict in itself, I think, is an unavoidable dynamic. It is part of the human condition. I think any time that we have any type of relationships and interpersonal relationships or personal types of situations, we as human beings, it's part of the situation to just have conflict because we're different types of people. That being said, I think that it kind of is broken down into kind of components. Some of us thrive on a certain amount of conflict. Some of us, perform and function better under certain levels of conflict. Believe it or not, neurophysiologically, we need some kind of conflict. We need levels of anxiety and things like that to actually stimulate neurotransmissions and components in the brain and some of those things. But not all conflict has to be a bad thing. And I'll kind of get into some of this in just a little bit in terms of, as Mr. Shepard had kind of identified, there's a kind of a catch-all term now that's referred to as mindfulness. It's part of the cognitive behavioral dynamic of dealing therapeutic with it, and it has found to be extremely helpful, and I'll talk about some of the specifics of that a little bit. But conflict, like I said, occurs in some aspects, day to day to day. And one of the things that people may not always be aware of in terms of dealing with conflict is that conflict usually we bring it has its origins and it has its history, even on the initiation of any kind of a conflict that we may be occurring. We bring attitudes and beliefs and things into the situation, and that it kind of sets the presence or the tone of how we are going to deal with issues in our life. Our own attitude, our own mental health, our own awareness, and mindfulness, if you will, has a large impact in terms of how we resolve conflict. Some of it has been learned, over a period of time. We are products of our environment from the time that we're young. We have learned to deal with conflict with familiar situations to, as we go through early adolescent and adult life, to find alternate aspects of dealing with conflict. That being said, I think that, there are certain components, as I've kind of mentioned here, healthy conflict, that we try to keep mindful in this situation, that we want to, what I refer to as kind of keep your eye on the prize. And what I mean by that is that we try to take the other person's consideration, their attitudes, their thoughts, their feelings, their attributes as a human being into consideration as part of dealing with things, and that it is not all about, winning. It is more about, trying to cause resolve and to assist with the process of being effective for everybody concerned. Unfortunately, we have these things that occur within us psychologically, and one of them is that we all are kind of driven by an ego, and that ego sometimes prevents us from being able to be so much maybe resolution focused as it is more that we want to get into kind of a win situation. Especially if it starts pushing our buttons in terms of, personally or, has a kind of an emotionally charged dynamic. And so, and I'll share a little bit more of that in just a little bit about kind of what that means and the drawback of being so center focused kind of thing. As I had kind of mentioned in one of my slides here, the unhealthy conflict is more like we get into a situation where it's a kind of a battle to be won, okay? We have a mission there, and sometimes we lose track of the dynamic of trying to resolve conflict. It ends up being that we are motivated by a kind of a personalization of it. We take ownership of it, and it becomes like, I want to win this situation, all right? And somehow the thought is that if I don't resolve this conflict in my favor, that it is going to be, that it somehow is going to be an identifying factor of myself, that I am going to be less than. Tim had talked about a weakness that people experience and feel, that as they are in times of strife and difficulties, that somehow I'm not being able to do this appropriately, and so I am somehow less than of a person or something, which is really inaccurate. But the thought and the presence is still there, especially if those things are really defining factors of kind of how and who we are. So I want to share just a little bit too of just kind of the definition of mental health as far as I'm concerned. Mental health to me is more than just kind of a state of mind. I think it has more of a global outreaching kind of a definition and term for me. And mental health is not only the state of my well-being, but also those of the people around me, the community and things. It's a defining factor of kind of how and who we are, but it is also a little bit more than that. It is also something that maybe it would hopefully to kind of resonate some thoughts of what needs to be done to maintain kind of the mental health. Not only within myself, but the community. And I think that it's an extremely important dynamic when we look at resolving any kind of conflict in our life, is to take into consideration other people's awareness and their mental health as well. It's not just, kind of a self-serving component, but it's also a situation where I think it's really important to take into consideration that maybe somebody else is struggling. Maybe they have their own kinds of things that are going on, and we have to take that as part of our understanding and how we're going to address any kind of conflict that we move forward with. So I think that that's really important things. I think that I kind of identified some of the resolution skills here, and the styles are not so much important, as that I think that the outcomes are the important. I had mentioned here the competitive style, the capability of resolving some conflict, and the competitive style is more what I had mentioned earlier, that it's more about me, it's a winning for me, even if it's at the expense of somebody else, which actually kind of will constitute more kind of a conflict when we don't take the other person's stuff into consideration. I think that it's really important, if we are self-serving in these situations, that sometimes it increases the conflicts pretty significantly. The compromise style, and that's where it is that we have the availability to actually, compromise in this situation, and that we're willing to give consideration to allow somebody else's point of view and their needs and wants to be present, and maybe not even so much to the point that it is going to resolve that in an effective way that I think is beneficial for me, but it may be that I'm considering that their stuff is as important as my stuff, okay? And I think that that's, an important kind of a thing to look at. Again, some people have some challenges with that. They may find it easier to, say, I am not going to, it's not going to be beneficial for me in this situation at all, but it's easier just to kind of give in and just let this situation occur, or something along those lines. And so I will let them win because I'm okay enough with me that I can actually allow somebody, to kind of be okay with them, and I don't place the same value, if you will, on their ability to be able to express themselves, and we can resolve this conflict, and I can still be okay in this situation. Many of us, I will tell you, sometimes have a very difficult and a challenging time with this kind of a dynamic. We place value on things, and when we do that, I mean that emotionally, psychologically, in all kinds of ways, and when we do that, sometimes the interpretation of the value becomes a defining moment for us. If I give somebody the availability and the power to, kind of define me and say, well, if I can give into this situation, or I give them the power, then, they will think of me in a better way, or it will resolve this situation, and I will be seen in a different light. I can be encouraged from that, or something along those lines. That kind of thinking, is effective for us, but one of the challenges is when we give the people the power in that situation for us to be okay, the equal and opposite of that also occurs, which is, all right, if I have somebody and compromise and give them the power to say that's going to define me, and oh gosh, I'm such a good guy for being able to resolve this for you in this way, well then they also have the power to take it away. And what I mean by that is if I allow somebody, to have those decisions, okay, and it defines me in a positive way, well then I also have to remember I can still do the same thing, and those people could potentially change their mind, and then they could reject me, and now they have the power to take it away. So we have to be mindful again of the opportunity of how we're going to resolve things, and taking into consideration the effect that that's not only going to have on myself, each of us, but also the people that are involved with potentially resolving this. So the compromising light, these are situations when it's not necessarily, just enough to allow somebody to, you know, you kind of give in, if you will, and allow yourself to kind of compromise in this situation. But there's kind of a hidden agenda behind that, and that situation is that you have to continue to make yourself available and utilize the situation, that it's just backing off maybe a little bit, and that you're going to, in this particular level of conflict, that you're still taking your stuff into consideration, but you're trying to be flexible enough that it ends up being a win-win situation, as opposed to I lose, you win, or I win and you completely lose. So the style collaboration, I really think, is probably one of the most effective. And this is a situation where we are working together. I refer to it as keeping your eyes on the prize again, okay? And that it's not the personalization between us that is going on, okay? It is more of a situation that we are focused on an outcome, all right? I'm taking responsibility and I'm taking ownership for my half of the resolution, and the hope is that I'm facilitating and you know, kind of perpetuating the opportunity for you at the other end of this to take ownership for your part, and that we don't get into the personalizations conflict that increases it. We actually are focusing on the availability of an outcome, okay, that is beneficial for all people concerned. And those are usually more beneficial. I remember when I was growing up, my parents had a Friday ritual thing that they would do. And my dad would come home from work and he would ask my mom a question. He would do this thing where he would say, would you like to go out to eat tonight? And my mother would say things like, oh yeah, that'd be great, that'd be really good. And he says, well, where would you like to go? And my mom would say, oh, I don't care. It doesn't matter, anywhere's fine. And my dad would say, okay, well, you know, gosh, we haven't been to that Italian place for X period of time. And my mom goes, you know, I don't want Italian food today. And my dad, I could already see the veins popping out in his neck. And so he would kind of, you know, get a little charged, but he would maintain a little bit. And then he goes, well, you know, there's a new Chinese place. And my mom says, no, I really don't feel like Chinese. And my dad would say, you always do this. You always do this, okay? I ask you where you want to go. You say you don't care, but you really do care. Why don't you just say where you want to go? And then my mom would utilize that as a situation to kind of throw what I call a grenade at my dad. She says, well, what difference is it going to make? Because you're going to do what you want to do anyway. And so they would go into this thing and they would utilize it, and this is what I talk about, this history in these conflicts, okay? They would utilize that as a springboard opportunity to kind of throw emotional grenades and unresolved issues at one another. They forgot to focus on going someplace to eat and the resolution of that, an opportunity for personalizations that occur. There was no collaboration that happened to that. And I would sit back there and I would watch them do this, and I was just fascinated that even at an early age going, what? I mean, this was just like an everyday thing, you know, every Friday thing. And I was like, and so finally there was one point in my life, I was over there and they were doing this, and I said, why don't you pick one Friday and you pick the next Friday? And that was an astounding thing for my parents to grasp. That was like an amazing process for them. They were like, why would we do that? And I'm like, you know, you're focusing on going out to eat. It might be a collaborative effort, you know, that'd be cool. You know, you don't have to get into these, you know, grenade throwing situations. You can just, you know, focus on doing something like that. Avoidance. This is a situation that I will tell you I see a lot with people, all right? And it is just easier because they have a projected identification, and what I mean by that is I'm going to avoid this conflict because I already know what the outcome is going to be. I'm not going to get my needs met in it. I know if I say something, they're not going to listen to me. It's going to be a situation where, okay, we are things are not going to change. And so what's going to happen is that if I just don't involve myself in it, then I kind of forfeit the opportunity over to you. Unfortunately, just as I had shared with you prior to this in the collaborative effort, it leads to resentments. It leads to building that history that you bring with you in terms of other kinds of conflicts, which I think ends up being. The other part about that is, from the mindful standpoint, it reinforces in us, okay, that our stuff is not important. We feel like, well, there's no point in me saying something, there's no point in me presenting something to you or making my opinion, because it's not going to change anything. You're not going to change your mind. It's not going to change your behaviors. And so I am just going to keep that to myself. Well, then that reinforces psychologically and emotionally with us that our stuff is not important, okay? Because it's not important to make an impact on that person, and it must not be important to me because I'm not doing anything about it anyway, okay? Because I can't. I'm stuck with this situation. It's not changing anything. And unfortunately, those are the kinds of things that, again, builds that history that we take with us in terms of conflict. When we get into situations with, you know, people in life of authority or whatever, then we sit there and say, well, see, now it's a defining factor for me. This is how I think about myself, and when I get myself in these situations, my stuff is not important. And that's really is very, very inaccurate, okay? All right, the basic principle, I have some skills here, and I think that there's 4 things that I think are really important. And one of them is that I think it's vitally important in conflict resolution to separate the person from the behavior, okay, or the outcome. As I had shared with you the experience with my parents, they personalized it. They took ownership of the conflict. And so they identified the individual in that situation, and that person became the conflict, okay? And I think that that is, you know, a significant mistake. I was working with a family, a young person that I was seeing just a couple of weeks ago, and he had come in for some suicidal thoughts, and his mother came with him, and she identified him as kind of he was a good kid, she loved him, but for most of the time she identified him as kind of an SOB. And she called him that. And I said, you help me understand here, he's your son, but you call him an SOB, you know? And she says, well, you know, he acts that way most of the time. And I said, but you're identifying him and labeling him as that. And so he thinks that that's who he is and what he is. Why wouldn't he be that way? I said, you have to separate him from his behavior. Okay, well, I do care about him, I just don't like the way he acts. And I said, you can focus on that, but you have to be able to identify him as somebody that you care about. And I said, because what you're doing at this point in time, you're using that identification of him as a filter that you're looking through, okay, that he's this SOB, his behavior, and so you're identifying him as an individual as that. And I said, that is really going to be challenging for him, anything for you. And so she was kind of able to see that, and he was able to hear that a little bit, which was, you know, pretty helpful. I think that it's really important, again, I keep reiterating to kind of keep your eyes on the prize, of focusing on the interest, not the specifics and the, you know, necessarily the outcomes of everything, the motivations, the, you know, all the personalizations and the things that are putting the person behind it. It's like, you know, are we trying to read kind of between the lines what is going on with this person, as opposed to, you know, what do we want as the outcome? I think that it's extremely important to continue to be mindful of what it is, be present about what it is that we are seeking in this situation. You know, not what the hidden agenda is or any of those kinds of dynamics. I think that that brings all of those personalizations into things, and I think it makes it very much more difficult to address. Oops. All right, and the third thing is I think that it's important to kind of brainstorm, create opportunities, outcomes, you know, stop and increase choices. This is the difference between, all right, having somebody where you can sit there and react to situations, or you can respond. Situation where I don't have any choice, you know, it's an opportunity. It's like the domino effect. Something happens and I just have to react to it. But responding is, you know, we can come up with choices. I can choose to do something else in a time of need, in a time of conflict. And I think that the way to achieve that is I think that we have to kind of stop, you know, the process. Again, focus on what we're trying to achieve here, all right? And kind of work with the person to kind of create opportunities, okay? To create things that would be beneficial, to create choices. Many times people that are struggling, okay, they don't feel that they have any choices. They don't feel like they have any opportunities. But being able to provide and question that. Part of the therapy that I do is referred to as cognitive behavioral therapy, and that is just challenging the thinking process. It's just like, you may not be aware of things, okay, but if we stop and collaboratively put some things together, it may be beneficial for an outcome, okay? Well, I wasn't even aware of those kinds of things, okay? I also state, you know, the objective criteria. I think that it's really important as, you know, instead of subjectively, just be objectively, be fair, you know, that there is resolution here, okay? That there are things that are, you know, kind of globally that may be beneficial instead of focusing on specific kinds of ideals or you know, thoughts or behaviors or some of those kinds of things. So, oops. So, the basic skills for conflict resolution are, you know, the mindful aspects of things. And when I talk about mindful, all right, mindful for me is, it has a lot of different things. The acronym for mindfulness that has been present over probably the last 10 years, you know, comes from a form of cognitive behavioral therapy, and it really is helpful. I wanted to share one form of things that I do for mindfulness, and I refer to it as thinking with your feet. Okay, I know that sounds really kind of bizarre, but if you think of mindfulness as kind of a grounding technique to bring you to the present, to, you know, keep you focused on the here and the now kind of a dynamic, I refer to a technique that I utilize is called thinking with your feet. And I think of, all right, where are my feet? Okay, they're right here, right now. And one foot, okay, is the emotive side, okay, the feeling side of my process, all right? And the other foot potentially is the rational cognitive side. And so what I want to do is take the best opportunity out of both of those. What's my best thinking and feeling? What's my best, you know, emotional aspect and things like that? Put that together, allow me to be present in it and stop, be aware, and then be able to address it. And so I use this technique a lot with people, all right, in their availability of just being present and problem solving, which is don't go into things that you already kind of know and go in and take this, you know, your resolution with things that you have learned that haven't been effective for you. Just stop and do something else, okay? Learn to do something else. Be present in your thinking, all right? The here and the now. Focus on what is available, all right? It allows you to kind of stop, think, you know, and just kind of observe some things that are potentially different. So I think that without those kinds of things, being present, having empathy, being awareness, focusing again on the kind of the outcome, you know, allowing the opportunity and having the your understanding that other people have things that are potentially going on, trying to resolve conflict without having to take ownership about everything except your own part of the process. I think that it really helps in terms of resolving any kinds of these conflicts. I think that, you know, if you go into situations and you have a mindset that you're wanting to have, you know, some type of peaceful resolution in these situations, it's much more beneficial. I try to express to people, would you rather be right in a situation or would you rather be happy? And I think that, you know, sometimes we get caught up in that correctness is somehow affirming to us that if I'm right, that sometimes I'm happier. But I think it's much more beneficial, you know, to say, I'd rather be happy, and so what is it going to take for both of us to kind of be in that situation? So, again, the ability to kind of see other people's points of views. I need to go back to mental health for a second. Those availabilities of doing that is also creating your own, you know, increased mental health and mental awareness. I think that that's vitally important. I think that, you know, my philosophy in things, how I live my life, I don't really watch a whole lot of the news. I don't read a whole lot. I don't watch a whole lot of TV shows or movies or anything like that, unless I think that they are going to be somehow a contributing factor to my well-being. Okay? And what I mean by that is, my philosophy is that contributing to my well-being, then they're contaminating it. All right? And so I want to go increasing my mental hygiene, my mental awareness, by improving things that are going to be helpful to me, not harmful to me. And if I can do that for myself, why wouldn't I want to portray that to other people that I'm having issues with in my life? Wouldn't I want the best things for them as well? Okay, and being conflictual with them is not being contributory to me. And so I try to think of myself that way. I don't want to put myself in any situation that it's not going to at least improve my well-being. You know, and that is my mental health. So I think that it's, you know, real important to, you know, utilize what we have available to us, you know, learn about things, you know, be aware of the other person's circumstances, try to increase that, find something out about them, try to reach a place that we have some neutralization and a, you know, a middle ground to be able to resolve things. I think that that's vitally important to do that. I think that it's important that we increase, you know, the availability to communicate. Most of us, truthfully, you know, we may see ourselves as fairly decent communicators, but most of us, I mean, even in the schools, you know, today, they really don't teach us how to communicate, you know. We spend a lot of time talking, but we don't really communicate. We don't do a whole lot of active listening and problem solving and understanding and empathetic kinds of things. So I think that that's, it's really important to be able to do that. I think that it's, thinking outside the box is hugely important. And I think that it's probably, you know, brainstorming, as I had mentioned before, trying to resolve conflict instead of it's my way or your way. Do we have here? You know, what kinds of things can you bring to the table? What can I bring to the table? How are we going to be able to fix this? You know, how are we going to do this? You know, globally would like to say that, you know, in all kinds of conflict resolution, it's vitally important, all right, to take other people's stuff into consideration as well as ours. I think that it's important to kind of, you know, look at the outcomes of things, what it is that we want to have happen, It's more important for resolution than it is, for sense of self and power and control kinds of dynamics. I think that
not addressed in schools. Where are they to be learned?
I think that we are products of our environment, to be truthful with you. I think that it is more of a familia thing. It's more of a subculture kind of component with peers. I don't know if y'all are aware of this, but after about the age of 6, okay, the 85% of the influence comes from our peers. The familia component, although is still as important, has somewhat lessening impact on that availability. And you think about it, your communicative styles, your problem-solving skills and stuff like that really are very much learned things. And if they're ineffective, I think it's really important that we learn to do something else. So.
Thank you, Dr. Thomas Kirk. Thank you for your time, sir.
Mm-hmm.
This is a reminder of the National Suicide Hotline. Also of the Wyoming Army National Guard Suicide Hotline of 307-369-3011. Call us if you need us and if you are struggling. Thank you. And now, ladies and gentlemen, Senior Master Sergeant Mr. Cody Stallings of the United States Air Force, personal testimony. Welcome, sir.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. Proud to be here. As she said, I'm Senior Master Sergeant Cody Stallings. I am the Operations Superintendent for the 790 Missile Security Forces Squadron here at F.E. Warren. And I've been asked to share a personal story that I've experienced in my life that has affected me throughout my career. In order to share this story, I have to go back to 2007, where I was a young airman stationed at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in Dayton, Ohio. And I had just recently got back from a deployment in Iraq. I think I got back, don't quote me on it, but I think I got back in September of 2006, and this incident happened in February of 2007. And essentially what happened is I was up on the law enforcement desk and I received a phone call. And I answered the phone as one of the BDOC controllers and I said, Wright-Pat Police, Airman Stallings. And there was a pause on the end of the line, and the individual said, Wright-Pat Police, Airman Stallings. And there was a sigh, and I heard, hey, Cody. And immediately when I heard, hey, Cody, I knew that the person on the other end of that line was my former supervisor, my fire team leader when I was in Iraq, Staff Sergeant Shane Miles. And he said, "Hey, Cody, can you do me a favor?" I said, "Yeah, Sergeant Miles, what's up?" He said, "Can you do me a favor and send a patrol down here to Cadam?" And I said, "Yeah, why?" And he hung up on me. And this chill kind of went over my body of something is not right. I don't know what it is, but that spider sense was tingling and it just didn't feel right. So I immediately looked over to my partner up on the desk and I said, "Hey, I just got a weird call from Sergeant Miles at Cadam, which is our combat arms range, and he wants us to send a patrol, but he hung up on me." And I could see in his face that he was concerned as well. So he's like, "Well, did you try calling them back?" So I tried calling them back, no answer. And I'm like, "Hey, something's not right here. We got to send patrols to Cadam." So my partner, Dave Schwartz, he outranked me. So he was kind of the lead controller on the desk. And I distinctly remember him leaning over the desk, standing up. This is before we had standing desks. And he dispatched Alpha 1, Charlie 1, and Papa 1, which were just our patrols, our lead patrols for those assigned sectors. And I very vividly remember him saying, "Alpha 1, Charlie 1, Papa 1, I need you to en route to Cadam, cover code 3. And what cover code 3 means is lights and sirens. It's an emergency, right? This isn't take your time, get there. This isn't do the speed limit. This is someone's life might be in danger, get there. And it wasn't normal for us to cover code 3 to things because we're an Air Force base, things are relatively safe. And one of the patrolmen responded back over the radio and said, "Raj, I copied cover code 3 with like a question mark on the end of it." And we were like, "Yes, cover code 3, get there ASAP." So they get there and it's just silence, right? And it's the unknowing. We don't know what's going on. And the patrols arrive on scene. They get into the building and one of the patrolmen comes up on the radio and says, "It appears we have one male down, a gun wound," right? So it's amazing how you revert back to your training. Because you just kind of kick, you don't really QRCs, which are quick reaction checklists, making notifications, pulling up what we needed to do and how we needed to get it done because we didn't know if Sergeant Miles was still alive or not. One of the patrolmen said that they felt a faint pulse, so we were under the impression that he was still alive at that time. And we were doing everything we could to get medical there. We had notified our flight. We don't know what's going on. We're cops. We have to go in there with kind of worst case scenario. Someone else might be in the building. And we got medical on scene as quickly as we could. And they loaded Sergeant Miles up into the ambulance and took him away. And we're getting phone calls from all these different people in our chain of command and medical services. And I remember in our blotter entry, we had canned entries for like a death on base. And one death. And we had to put that in there for the blotter. And we didn't know if there was a time of death because we didn't know if he had died yet. And medical ended up calling us back and said time of death was whatever it was. I don't recall. And my partner, Dave, he responded over the radio to our time of a pause over the radio, and our flight chief responded back on the radio kind of angrily, right? Like, upset. And he said, "Cease all radio transmissions now." And me and Dave kind of looked at each other like, what is going on? We have no idea. Did we do something wrong? We're just doing our job. And later that night, our flight chief was on scene, and that Sergeant Miles' fiance had showed up to cat him. And apparently she was the phone call that he made before he called me to send a patrol. So she was worried, and she came, and she didn't know what was going on. She was standing. Excuse me. As she was standing next to my flight chief, she heard us come over the radio and announce his time of death. Naturally, she didn't take it very well, and neither did we. Commander came up onto the law enforcement desk dressed in his full service blues, and there were tears in his eyes. He hugged us. He was crying. It was a rough night, right? Interviewed by OSI. I was the last person to talk to him alive. And I remember I was young, I was 19 maybe, and he just didn't look real to me in that casket. He looked plasticky. His face miles that I wanted to keep in my head. The story stopped. I'm part of a small class. I think it was like 16 people. And the topic was suicide prevention. How do we stop it? And does anybody have a story that they would like to tell? So naturally, I'm pretty open about things. And I said, yeah, I'll share my story. And I tell my story, the same story that I'm telling you here today. And a girl in my class, fellow tech sergeant, she gets up and she leaves the room bawling, just sobbing. Wow, like I get emotional about my story, but I didn't realize that other people would get that emotional about this story. So we stopped the discussion, we took kind of a small break, and we resumed, we switched to another topic, and that was kind of it. That was the end of the conversation for the day. But my class had kind of a tradition to where at the end of class every night, we would go out together to a restaurant. And we were at a restaurant that night, and I was sitting across from her, and I wanted to bring it up and just kind of like ask if she was okay, but it was pretty awkward for me to do that. Well, she actually ended up breaking the silence, and she said, Cody, where were you stationed at when that story happened that you told in class today? And I said, I was at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base back in 2007. And she said, and what was the name of the NCO that saved his life? And I was like, his name was Staff Sergeant Shane Miles. She pulled up her sleeve, and she had the name Shane tattooed on her wrist. And she said, the story that you told of the fiance that collapsed in the arms of the flight chief when you announced time of death, that was me. That was me. So that was a very eye-opening moment for me, small world that we live in, to where several years later I'm on the other side of the world in a different country, and there I am with this girl. So we bonded over that. Obviously I expressed my condolences and my sadness and guilt. But this is a story that happened to me back in 2007, and now it's 2020, almost 2021, and I think about it pretty often. I mean, there's several times a year where a memory, a sound, a smell, a word, something will bring in a memory of that night, which was by far and traumatic nights of my young Air Force career. Tough to live with that experience, tough to know that there was someone that I cared about and looked up to that was hurting so badly privately that they thought the only way out was to take their life. And there's a lot of guilt that's associated with that for all parties that are involved, because we're kind of taught, at least I have been, that there's kind of warning signs and indicators of things that are said or things that are done that may be warning signs of someone is considering this. And that just simply wasn't the case with Shane. It wasn't. His supervisor said that a couple days he was asking for promotion material that he could study for promotion. He was looking at, he was a car guy, he wanted to buy a new truck. He had a small child at home. This is a guy that had a future and was planning for things in the future, looking forward to things in the future. But for some reason, that day just decided that enough was enough. Because sometimes there's not warning signs, but oftentimes there are. And even if there's not warning signs, I think that if we are better connected as a community, do you want to go out and get some food?